I wasn't supposed to be his wife, not even for a single song. But that night he looked at me like I already was. The music was soft, something slow and forgettable, the kind of song people swayed to without thinking, and I sat there alone at table 17, fingers wrapped around a glass of water I hadn't touched in 20 minutes. The condensation had soaked through the napkin beneath it, leaving a dark ring like proof I'd been there too long. The ballroom smelled like roses and champagne and expensive perfume. None of it belonged to me. I was just Ava Brooks, 26, single mom, babysitter booked until midnight, and a neighbor who owed me a favor, watching my daughter 3 miles away in a small apartment that never saw chandeliers like this. I shouldn't have come, but my cousin insisted, said it would be good for me to get out, to remember I was still allowed to exist outside grocery lists and bedtime stories. So I wore the only dress that still fit, a navy one that hit just below my knees, and shoes that pinched after 10 minutes. And I sat alone watching everyone else live lives that looked easier than mine. Laughter bounced off marble floors, heels clicked, glasses clinked, and every now and then someone glanced at me with that same look, polite curiosity mixed with quiet pity, like they could tell I didn't belong, and maybe they were right. I checked my phone once, 8:42 p.m. One unread message from Mrs. Collins: "Your daughter is asleep, don't worry." She smiled when I read her your note. My chest tightened just a little. I exhaled slowly and told myself I'd leave after the next song. I didn't need this. I didn't need to pretend I was part of something I wasn't. Then the music changed, not the song exactly, but the feeling, like someone had dimmed the air itself. Conversations softened a beat too fast, laughter cut short, and even the waitstaff moved differently, more alert, more careful. I noticed the doors before I noticed him. They opened without announcement, no dramatic entrance, just a quiet shift. And suddenly there were men in black suits stepping inside, not loud, not aggressive, just present, the kind of presence that didn't ask for attention, but took it anyway. People moved without realizing they were moving, making space, clearing paths as if guided by instinct. I looked up because everyone else did, and that's when I saw him. He wasn't the tallest man in the room, or the loudest, or even the most dressed up, but he was the one everything seemed to bend around. Dark suit tailored perfectly, shoulders squared like he carried something heavier than the night itself. His hair was neat, his expression calm, but his eyes, they didn't search, they selected, slow, deliberate, scanning the room like he already knew what he was looking for. I dropped my gaze almost immediately, because men like that didn't belong anywhere near women like me, and I had no interest in being noticed by someone who could probably change lives with a single sentence. I focused on my glass again, tracing the edge with my finger, counting breaths in and out like I did when life felt too loud. 1, 2, 3, breathe. 1, 2, 3, breathe. The band played on, couples swayed, and I told myself the moment had passed, until a shadow fell across my table. I didn't look up at first. I thought it was a server, or maybe my cousin finally remembering I existed. But then I noticed the silence around me, the kind that spreads when something important is happening nearby. My fingers stilled against the glass, and slowly, reluctantly, I lifted my eyes. He was standing right there, close enough that I could see the subtle lines at the corners of his eyes, close enough to catch the faint scent of something clean, expensive, and unfamiliar. He didn't smile. He didn't introduce himself. He just extended his hand toward me, palm open, steady, as if it had always been meant to be there. "Stand up," he said, his voice low, controlled, not loud, but somehow impossible to ignore. I blinked once, unsure I'd heard him right. "I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong person," I whispered, already shaking my head, already pulling back slightly, because this wasn't happening. This didn't happen to people like me. His gaze didn't waver. "You're exactly the right person," he replied, and there was something in the way he said it, not warmth, not kindness, but certainty, the kind that made arguing feel pointless. My heart picked up just a little. I glanced around, instinctively, half expecting someone to step in to laugh, to explain this was a mistake, but no one moved. If anything, people were watching, pretending not to, but watching all the same. I swallowed. "I can't," I said quietly. "I'm not. I don't even know you." His hand didn't drop. Instead, he leaned closer, just enough that only I could hear him smile. He said softly, "You're my wife tonight." The words hit me like a misstep, like missing a stair in the dark. I almost laughed because it sounded absurd, because it had to be a joke. But nothing about his expression suggested humor. I shook my head again, more firmly this time. "No, I'm not doing that." I started to push my chair back, to stand on my own terms, to leave, to remove myself from whatever strange moment this was. But then he spoke again, lower, closer. "If you walk out of here alone, you won't make it past the door." Something in my chest tightened, not fear exactly, but awareness, sharp, sudden, like stepping into cold air. I stilled my movements and looked at him more carefully. This time really looked and for the first time I noticed it the way his shoulders angled slightly not toward me, but past me, the way his eyes flicked once over my shoulder, then back, the way the room around us felt just a little too still, like everyone was pretending not to notice something they absolutely did. My pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his hand shifted closer until his fingers brushed lightly against mine, not grabbing, not forcing. "Just there waiting. Choose quickly," he murmured. "The song is ending." I hesitated. 1 second, 2 seconds, my mind racing through possibilities, none of them making sense. And then, without fully understanding why, I placed my hand in his. It was warm, firm, grounding, and before I could second guess it, he guided me to my feet, smooth, effortless, like we had done this before, like we belonged in the same frame. The music swelled around us as he led me toward the dance floor, his hand settling at my waist, steady, controlled, not possessive, just certain. My other hand rested against his shoulder, and suddenly I was there in the center of a room I didn't belong in, dancing with a man I didn't know, while everyone watched like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You're shaking," he said quietly. "I'm not," I lied instantly. He exhaled, something almost like amusement flickering across his face. "You are, but you're still here. That matters." The words settled somewhere deep and uncomfortable, because they were true. I was still there, even though everything in me said I shouldn't be. Then his gaze softened just a fraction. "You have a child, don't you?" he added, and my breath caught completely. "How do you know?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't look surprised. "Because you're careful," he said simply, "and people who are careful like that usually have someone waiting for them at home." My chest tightened again, this time different, heavier, more real. Before I could respond, his hand tightened just slightly at my waist, not enough to hurt, just enough to ground me, and his voice dropped lower. "Listen to me," he said, without breaking the rhythm of the dance. "Do not look behind you. Do not step away from me, and whatever happens, keep smiling." My heart slammed against my ribs. "Why, what's going on?" I whispered, but he was already looking past me again, already calculating something I couldn't see. Then, almost as an afterthought, his lips brushed near my ear, his voice barely there. "If they come close." I stopped, pretending. His hand tightened just enough to keep me grounded, but not enough to trap me. And that was somehow worse, because it meant I was choosing to stay. The music carried us in slow circles, 1 step forward, 1 step back, like breathing, like pretending like this was normal. But nothing about this felt normal. My heart would not slow down. It pounded in my ears, drowning out the soft piano, the quiet laughter, the clinking glasses. All I could hear was his voice echoing in my head. "Do not look behind you." So of course I wanted to look. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn around to see what kind of danger required a stranger to claim me as his wife in the middle of a crowded wedding. But his hand shifted slightly, pressing more firmly against my waist, and I understood that was not a suggestion, that was a boundary. I forced my eyes to stay on him instead, on the sharp line of his jaw, on the calm way he moved, like none of this was new to him, like rooms like this been around him all the time. "You are doing fine," he said quietly, his tone even almost detached, like he was commenting on the weather. I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. "I do not think I am," I whispered back. He glanced down at me just for a second, and something flickered there, not softness, not exactly, but awareness, like he was cataloging every reaction, every hesitation. "You have not tried to pull away," he said. "That counts for something." I swallowed. I almost did, I admitted. His lips curved just slightly, not a smile, more like acknowledgement. "But you did not," he replied, and that seemed to satisfy him more than it should have. The song shifted into a softer bridge, and he guided me a little closer. The movement subtle, controlled, his hand never leaving my waist, my fingers still resting against his shoulder. I could feel the strength there, not threatening, just present, like a wall you could lean on if you had to. I did not know why that thought made my chest tighten again. "I am Ava," I said suddenly, because it felt wrong to stand here like this, without a name, without something human between us. His gaze dropped to mine more fully this time. "Adrian," he said, just that, no last name, no explanation, like he did not need one, like it would not change anything if I knew it. "Adrian," I repeated quietly, testing how it felt. It sounded expensive, dangerous, like it belonged in a world I had never stepped into before. His eyes narrowed just slightly, not in anger, but in focus, like he was listening for something beyond me. "Good," he said. "Now, when I turn, you do not resist, you follow my lead." "Exactly." My pulse spiked again. "What? Why are we turning?" He did not answer right away. Instead, he shifted his stance, and suddenly, we were moving differently, no longer just swaying, but gliding across the floor, one smooth motion into the next, like a pattern I had never learned. But somehow my body followed his anyway, because he made it easy. Because he did not give me time to think, because thinking felt like the wrong choice right now. "Trust me," he said softly, And that word hit me harder than anything else he had said so far. Trust. One almost laughed, because I did not trust him. I did not trust any of this. But I trusted the way he held himself. I trusted the way he had not hurt me. I trusted the way the room seemed to orbit him, without question, and for reasons I could not explain. That was enough. For one more step, then another we turned, and for half a second my body reacted before my mind did. I saw them, not directly, not fully, just shapes at the edge of my vision, men standing too still, too focused, their attention not on the bride, not on the dance floor, but on us, and the air shifted again, colder, tighter, like something unseen had just locked into place. My fingers pressed slightly into his shoulder. Without meaning to, I saw that he murmured, barely moving his lips. I did not mean to, I whispered back, but my voice felt thinner now, like the room had stolen something from it. You were still here, he reminded me, and that grounded me more than anything else, because it was true. I had not run, I had not stepped away. Even now, when something deep inside me said I should, his hand moved up slightly along my back, guiding me through another turn, slower this time, closer, our steps, smaller, more controlled. You are going to smile, he said gently, not like a command this time, more like a reminder. I do not think I can. I admitted. You can, he replied, because if you do not, they will notice. The word, they landed heavier than anything else I felt. My lips lift just slightly, not a real smile, not the kind that reached your eyes, but enough to pass, enough to blend into the moment. His gaze flicked over my shoulder again, then back to me. Good, he said, softer now, like he was speaking to himself as much as to me. The song began to wind down, the music stretching into its final notes, and a new kind of tension filled the space between us, because I could feel it. Something was about to change. What happens when the song ends? I asked quietly, because that felt like the only question that mattered. His expression did not shift, but his eyes did, darker, sharper, like whatever came next required more than just pretending. Then we walk, he said simply, together. I nodded slowly, even though my chest felt tight again, even though my mind was already racing ahead to what together meant, to where he would take me, to whether I would have a choice in any of it. The final note lingered in the air, and applause rose around us, soft, polite, expected. He did not let go right away. Instead, his hand stayed at my waist, steady, grounding, like he was giving me a second to catch up to what had just happened. Then slowly, deliberately, he stepped back just enough to take my hand properly, his fingers threading through mine like it belonged there, like it had always belonged there. Do not hesitate, he said under his breath as he started to lead me off the floor. I followed, because I did not know what else to do, because stopping now felt more dangerous than continuing, because somewhere between the first step and the last, I had already crossed a line I could not see, and as we moved through the crowd, I felt it, the weight of eyes tracking us, the quiet shift of bodies making space again, the awareness that whatever this was, it was no longer just a dance. And just before we reached the edge of the room, his grip tightened, just slightly, his voice dropping one last time, stay close, Ava, because now they are certain. The moment we stepped off the dance floor, I felt it, the shift, not in the room, but in him, his grip on my hand. Steady but more deliberate, like every step now had a purpose. We moved through the crowd together, not rushed, not hesitant, just controlled, like he knew exactly where he was going and expected the world to move with him. And it did. People stepped aside, without being asked. Conversations paused just long enough to let us pass, and then resumed like nothing had happened. But I could feel it, the attention, the quiet awareness that something about us did not belong in the same category as everything else. My pulse had not slowed, it stayed just beneath the surface, sharp and constant, reminding me that this was not over, not even close. Where are we going? I asked softly, keeping my voice level, even though my thoughts were anything but calm. Out, he said simply, not looking at me, as his eyes scanned ahead, then behind, then back to me, like he was checking something invisible. You said we needed to stay together, I reminded him. I am still with you, he replied, and somehow that answer did not feel reassuring. We reached the edge of the ballroom, near a set of tall glass doors that led out to a terrace overlooking the city lights. The night beyond looked quieter, darker, like a different world entirely. He slowed just slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me to feel it. Stay close, he repeated, his voice lower now, almost lost beneath the music. I nodded, even though he was not looking at me, and instinctively stepped closer until my shoulder nearly brushed his arm. The contact was brief, but grounding, like a reminder that I was not navigating this alone. He pushed the door open with his free hand, and cool air rushed in, carrying the faint scent of rain and something distant. The terrace was mostly empty, just a few scattered guests lingering near the railing, speaking in low voices, but even they seemed to sense the shift, As we stepped outside, their conversations quieted, their bodies angled away, giving us space. Without understanding why Adrian did not stop moving, he guided me along the edge of the terrace past the soft glow of string lights until we reached a quieter corner, partially hidden by tall planters filled with greenery. From here the ballroom was still visible through the glass, but muted, like watching a different life unfold. I exhaled slowly, not realizing how tightly I had been holding myself together until now. "What is happening?" I asked again, because the question had been sitting heavy in my chest since the moment he approached me. He finally looked at me fully, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharper than before, calculating, measuring, deciding something. "I was not part of you. Were in the wrong place at the right time," he said. "That is not an answer," I replied, and for the first time there was a hint of frustration in my voice. Not fear, not panic, just a need to understand. His gaze held mine a second longer, then he nodded once, like he had expected that response. "Fair," he said, then quieter. "There are people inside who are watching me, and now they are watching you because of me." I felt that sentence settle slowly, each word finding its place until it made sense in a way I did not want it to. "So, I am part of whatever this is now. You are part of what they believe," he corrected, "and that matters more than what is actually true." My fingers tightened slightly around his hand. I did not even remember when I stopped thinking about letting go. "What do they believe?" I asked. He studied me again, then answered, "They believe you are someone important to me." A small, humorless breath left me. "That is not true." "No," he agreed, "but it is useful." I should have pulled away, then I should have stepped back, created distance, reminded both of us that this was temporary, that I had a life waiting for me outside of this strange, carefully controlled moment. But I did not. Instead, I asked, "Why me?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because you were alone." The words were simple, but they landed deeper than I expected. Something in my chest tightened, not hurt, not exactly, just recognition, like he had seen something I tried very hard to hide. I lifted my chin slightly. "I am not as invisible as you think," I said quietly. His expression shifted, just slightly, not dismissive, not amused, something closer to respect. "I know," he said, and that surprised me more than anything else. "Then why?" He exhaled softly, glancing briefly toward the ballroom before returning his focus to me. "Because you were not trying to be seen," he said, "and people like that are harder to question." I absorbed that slowly, the idea that my effort to stay unnoticed had somehow made me more visible in the way that mattered most. The silence between us stretched for a moment, not uncomfortable, just full, like there were more things being said, without words. Then his posture changed subtly, his shoulders straightening, his attention shifting past me again. "They are moving," he said quietly. My body reacted before my mind did. I turned slightly, then caught myself remembering his earlier warning, "Do not look behind you." I froze, forcing myself to face him instead. "What do we do now?" I asked. "You stay with me," he said simply, his voice steady again, controlled like before, like the moment of explanation had passed, and we were back inside whatever role he had placed us in. "And you?" He almost smiled, not quite, but close enough. "I handle the rest." I hesitated, then nodded, because at this point there was no version of this where I walked away unaffected, no clean exit, no simple explanation, just a choice to either trust the way he moved through this world or risk stepping into something I could not see. His hand shifted slightly, tightening around mine, not possessive, just certain. Then he stepped closer, reducing the space between us again, not for show, not for anyone watching, but because it was necessary, because it made the illusion stronger. "Listen to me, Ava," he said softly, and the way he said my name made something inside me still. "If anyone speaks to you, you let me answer. If anyone asks you a question, you keep it simple. You do not offer more than you need to." I nodded slowly. "Okay, and one more thing," he added, his voice dropping just a fraction. "Do not look afraid." I almost laughed at that, because I was afraid, not overwhelmingly, not paralyzing, but enough to feel it in the edges of my thoughts. "I will try," I said. "That is all I need," he replied. Then, just as suddenly as the moment had slowed, it shifted again. Footsteps approached, measured, deliberate, not rushed, not casual, the kind of steps that belonged to someone who knew exactly where they were going and expected to be received. Adrian did not turn immediately. Instead, he adjusted his grip on my hand, grounding, steadying, like he was preparing both of us at once. Then finally, he angled his body slightly, placing himself just enough between me and whoever was coming. His voice dropped one last time, calm but absolute. "Remember, you are not alone." Then he looked past me and said evenly, "Good evening." The voice that answered him did not belong to someone unsure of their place. It was smooth, measured, carrying a kind of quiet confidence that made the air shift again. "Good evening, Adrian," it said, and I felt his hand remain steady around mine, not tightening, not loosening, just present like he had expected this exact moment. I kept my eyes forward, just over his shoulder, not turning, not searching, remembering every word he had told me. The footsteps stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could feel the presence without needing to see it. "You did not mention you would be attending tonight," the voice continued, polite, but with something underneath. It's something sharper, something that did not quite match the tone. Adrian did not move immediately. When he spoke, his voice matched the other man's calm, but there was an edge to it that made it clear this was not a casual conversation. "Plans change," he said simply. I felt the subtle shift in his stance, the way his body angled, just slightly more in front of mine, shielding. Without making it obvious, my fingers curled faintly against his hand, grounding myself in the only thing that felt stable right now. "And you brought company," the man said, and even without looking I knew that part was directed at me. I kept my posture still, shoulders relaxed, chin level, the way I had seen women at this wedding hold themselves, like they belonged, like nothing around them could touch them. Adrian's thumb brushed lightly against the back of my hand, once a small movement, but deliberate, like a reminder, "Stay steady." "Yes," he replied. "My wife." The word landed differently this time, not surprising, not jarring, but heavier, because now it was not just between us. Now it was something being offered to someone else. Tested. Wade. I felt the man's attention shift fully toward me, not in a way that felt aggressive, but in a way that felt thorough, like he was trying to understand something that did not quite fit his expectations. I resisted the urge to look at him directly, instead letting my gaze settle somewhere neutral, just past Adrian's shoulder, as if I had no reason to be concerned, as if this was normal, as if I had done this before. "It is a pleasure," the man said after a brief pause, and I realized he was speaking to me now, his tone still polite, but with a curiosity he was not hiding. I inclined my head slightly, offering the smallest smile I could manage. "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice even, calm, measured, just enough warmth to feel real, but not enough to invite more questions. Adrian's hand shifted slightly at my back, not pushing, not pulling, just reinforcing the space between us. I could feel his attention split, now part of it on the man in front of us, part of it on everything else around us. The man took a step closer, not invading, not crossing any clear boundary, but enough to test it. "You are new," he observed, not a question. I let a small breath out through my nose, as if amused rather than unsettled. "I suppose I am," I replied simply. He studied me for a moment longer, and I could feel it. The careful evaluation, the quiet attempt to find something that did not align, something that would break the image we were presenting. "Beside me," Adrian spoke again, his tone unchanged, but firmer. "She prefers to keep things private." The man's attention shifted back to him, a flicker of something passing between them, too quick, too subtle for me to fully understand. "Of course," he said smoothly, "privacy is valuable these days." There was a pause, not empty, but full, like something unspoken had just been acknowledged. Then the man continued, "Enjoy your evening, Adrian. I am sure we will speak again soon." I felt the space change again as his presence pulled back, the footsteps retreating, the quiet tension easing just slightly, but not disappearing entirely. Adrian did not move right away. He waited a second, maybe two, like he was confirming something unseen, before his posture relaxed just enough for me to notice. He exhaled softly, almost imperceptibly, then his hand shifted from my back to my arm, guiding me gently away from the corner we had been standing in. My legs felt steadier now, but my thoughts were not. They moved quickly, trying to catch up to everything that had just happened. "Who was that?" I asked quietly once we were a few steps away from where the man had been standing. "Someone who pays attention," Adrian replied, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "That does not answer my question," I said, and there was a hint of something sharper in my tone. Now not anger, just the need to understand the situation I had been pulled into. He glanced down at me briefly, then forward again. "It is not supposed to," he said, and for some reason that answer made sense in a way I did not like. We moved back toward the glass doors leading into the ballroom. The music inside had shifted again, something brighter, something faster, like the night was continuing, without pause, without acknowledgement of what had just unfolded on the terrace. "Are we going back?" and I asked. "Yes," he said simply, and the word carried more weight than it should have. "Why?" "Because leaving now would draw more attention than staying." His response was immediate, like he had already considered every option, every outcome. I nodded slowly, even though part of me wanted to argue, wanted to step away from all of this, from him, from whatever invisible line I had crossed the moment I took his hand. But I stayed because leaving did not feel safer, because somehow in the middle of all this uncertainty, he felt like the only thing I could trust. And that realization unsettled me more than anything else. His hand found mine again as we approached the door, not Asking, not forcing, just there waiting. I hesitated for half a second, then let my fingers slip into his. The contact familiar, now grounding in a way I could not explain. He pushed the door open, and the warmth of the ballroom wrapped around us again. The light, the music, the movement, all of it rushing back like nothing had changed, but everything had. I could feel it in the way people looked at us now, not just curious, but aware, not just observing, but watching, as if something about us had shifted into focus. Adrian did not slow. He guided me through the room with the same controlled ease as before, but this time I noticed more: the subtle glances, the quiet pauses, the way conversations dipped. When we passed, "You are doing well," he murmured without looking at me. I let out a small breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "I do not feel like I am." He glanced at me. "Then just for a moment, you are still here," he said again, and there was something in his voice this time, something quieter, something that felt almost like approval. We reached the edge of the dance floor. Again, the lights softer here, the music steady, predictable, a contrast to everything else that had been happening around us. Adrian slowed, then turned slightly toward me, his hand still holding mine. His gaze meeting mine fully for the first time since we stepped back inside. "We are not done," he said, and the words were not a warning, not exactly, but they carried the weight of one. I felt my pulse rise again, but I did not look away. I did not step back. Instead, I nodded slowly, because somewhere between the first step and now I had already made a choice to stay, and his grip tightened just slightly, as if he felt it too. Then he added quietly, "Stay close, Ava, because now they are not just watching, they are waiting." Waiting feels different when you know it is meant for you. The music kept playing, people kept laughing, glasses still clinked, but underneath all of it, there was something else, something quiet and sharp like a held breath that never fully released. I stayed where I was beside him, his hand still around mine, steady, certain, like it had decided something for both of us, and I had simply followed. His eyes moved across the room, not restless, not nervous, just aware, tracking details I could not see, patterns I did not understand. And for the first time I realized this was not new to him. This was routine. This was how he existed in rooms like this, always watching, always calculating, always prepared for something just beyond the surface. "You said they are waiting," I whispered, keeping my voice low enough that it would not carry past him. His gaze shifted to me briefly, then back to the room. "Yes," he said simply. "What happens when they stop waiting?" I asked. His thumb brushed once over my knuckles. Slow, deliberate. "Then we find out," he replied. And something about the calm way he said it made my chest tighten again. Not panic, not fear exactly, just the awareness that whatever came next would not be small. A server passed by offering champagne on a silver tray. Adrian took one glass, without looking at it, then handed it to me. I hesitated before accepting it, not because I did not understand the gesture, but because I did. He wanted me to look normal, to blend in, to be part of the rhythm of the room. Instead of something separate, something noticeable. I wrapped my fingers around the stem, the glass cool against my skin. "Thank you," I murmured. He nodded once. "Good, keep it," he said. "It gives your hand something to do." I almost smiled at that, because it was practical, because it was thoughtful in a way I did not expect from him, and because it worked. I lifted the glass slightly, taking a small sip, not tasting it, not really, just letting the motion ground me. "People who belong here always have something in their hands, something to occupy the silence." The band shifted songs again, something brighter, something with more movement. Couples returned to the floor. Laughter rose a little louder, like the room was trying to reclaim its earlier ease. Adrian did not move right away. Instead, he stayed where he was, letting the moment settle, like he was waiting for something unseen to align. Then finally, he stepped forward, guiding me with him back toward the dance floor again, not rushed, not hesitant, just intentional. We moved with the crowd, blending into it, instead of standing apart. This time the difference was subtle but important. Before we had been noticed, now we were part of the pattern, part of the expected flow. His hand returned to my waist as we stepped into the rhythm again, my body following his without thinking, without resistance. "You are learning," he said quietly, and there was something almost approving in his tone. "I am adapting," I corrected softly. His lips curved just slightly, not a full smile, but close enough. "Adaptation is survival," he replied, and the words lingered longer than they should have. I glanced at him then, because something about that statement felt heavier than the moment required, felt like it belonged to something larger than a wedding dance. His gaze caught mine for a fraction of a second, then shifted away again, like he had said more than he intended. The music carried us through another slow turn, his hand steady at my back, my steps more confident now, not because I understood what was happening, because I understood how to move within it. I could feel the difference in myself, the initial hesitation replaced by Something quieter, more focused, like I had accepted the role I was playing even if I did not fully understand the script. Then his posture changed again, subtle, but immediate. His hand tightened just slightly at my waist, not enough to alarm anyone watching, but enough for me to feel it. They are closer, he murmured, my breath caught. But I did not look, I did not turn, I stayed exactly where I was, exactly how he had positioned me. Good, he added softly, like he could feel the choice I had just made. The room did not change on the surface, nothing obvious, nothing dramatic, but I could feel it now, the way certain conversations paused a beat too long, the way movement slowed just slightly near the edges of the floor, the way attention shifted without anyone acknowledging it. I focused on the music, on the rhythm, on the steady pressure of his hand anchoring me here. What do you need me to do? I asked quietly. Nothing different, he said. Just stay with me, always with me, I echoed under my breath, and the words felt strange, but not wrong. He glanced at me again, this time longer, something unreadable passing through his expression. Then he nodded once. Yes, the song began to build toward its peak, the tempo rising just enough to change the energy around us. Couples moved faster. Laughter brighter, the illusion of normalcy stronger than ever, and right in the middle of it, I felt it, the shift, not in the room, not in the music, but in him. His attention sharpened, his movements more precise, like he had reached the point he had been waiting for. His hand slid slightly along my back, guiding me through a turn that brought me closer to his side rather than directly in front of him, a protective angle, one that placed me just behind the line of his shoulder without making it obvious. I followed without question, without hesitation, because by now I understood this was not about dancing anymore, this was positioning. Then his voice came low and steady, barely audible over the music. When I move, you move, do not stop, do not look back. My pulse jumped again, but I nodded, even though he was not looking at me. Understood, I whispered. The music swelled, reaching its final measures, and for a moment, everything felt suspended, like the entire room was holding itself in place, waiting for something to break the illusion. Adrian's grip tightened just slightly, and I felt it, the decision, the shift, the moment before something changed. Then he moved, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a smooth, controlled step that turned us out of the center of the floor and into motion through the crowd again. I followed, instantly matching his pace, matching his direction, not thinking, just moving, because that was what he needed, because that was what kept me close. And as we passed between clusters of people, I felt it again, stronger this time, the awareness, the attention, the certainty that we were no longer just being watched, we were being tracked. My fingers tightened around his hand without meaning to, and he responded immediately, his grip firm, grounding, like a silent reassurance. Do not break, he murmured, and I realized then he was not just talking about the moment, he was talking about me, about the role, about the illusion we were holding together. And for reasons I could not fully explain, I did not want to be the one who let it fall apart. We reached the edge of the room again, near a hallway that led away from the main ballroom. The noise dimmed slightly here, the light softer, the space less crowded. Adrian slowed just enough to adjust his pace, then glanced down at me one more time, his eyes sharper than ever. Stay with me, Ava, he said quietly, because this is where it changes. The hallway felt different the moment we stepped into it, quieter, narrower, like the air itself had less room to move. The music from the ballroom faded into a distant rhythm, still there, but no longer surrounding us. And for the first time since he had taken my hand, I felt the absence of the crowd, the absence of noise, the absence of distraction. Adrian did not slow his pace, his grip on my hand firm, guiding as we moved forward, the soft carpet beneath my heels muffling each step, the walls lined with dim sconces casting long shadows that shifted as we passed. What changes here? I asked, my voice low, instinctively matching the quieter space. He did not answer right away, his eyes moving ahead, then briefly to the side, then back forward, like he was measuring distance. Timing, presence, everything at once out here. There are fewer variables, he said finally, fewer people, fewer eyes, fewer things I cannot control. That did not make me feel better. It should have, but it did not, because fewer people also meant fewer witnesses, fewer distractions, fewer barriers between whatever was following us and wherever we were going. I tightened my fingers around his hand slightly without thinking, and he responded immediately, his grip adjusting, not stronger, just more certain. I am right here, he said quietly, and the words settled into me in a way I was not prepared for. We reached a corner in the hallway where it turned sharply to the left. Adrian slowed just enough to glance around it before guiding me through the turn, his body angled slightly ahead of mine again, that same subtle positioning that placed him between me and anything we could not see I followed without question, without hesitation, because by now I understood that hesitation was the one thing I could not afford. What are we moving toward? I asked, because the direction felt intentional, not random, not evasive, purposeful. An exit, he said simply. My breath caught slightly. Are we leaving? Yes, he replied, then added softer, for now, echoed in my mind like a question he had not answered, like something temporary, something unfinished. The hallway stretched ahead of us longer than I expected. Doors lined one side, closed, identical, unremarkable, while the other side opened intermittently to small alcoves with chairs and decorative tables, all of it quiet, all of it still. But I could feel it again, that same awareness from the ballroom, the sense that we were not alone, even if I could not see anyone. My steps stayed in sync with his, matching his pace, matching his rhythm until it felt almost automatic. Then his posture shifted again, not abruptly, not dramatically, but enough for me to notice his shoulders tightening, just slightly, his gaze sharpening. They are behind us now, he said under his breath. My chest tightened, but I did not turn, I did not break. I kept my eyes forward, just like he told me. Good, he murmured, like he could feel the choice again, like it mattered more than anything else. In that moment, how close? I asked, barely above a whisper. Close enough that stopping would be a mistake. His answer came immediately, no hesitation, no uncertainty. I nodded, even though he was not looking at me, and something inside me settled, not calm, not exactly, but focused, like the edges of fear had sharpened into something more useful. Then we do not stop, I said quietly. His head tilted just slightly in my direction, and for a brief second, I felt it, that flicker of something different, not surprise, not quite approval, but recognition, like I had stepped into something he had not expected from me. No, we do not, he agreed. We reached the end of the hallway where a set of double doors stood slightly ajar, the faint glow of exterior lighting visible through the narrow opening. Adrian slowed just enough to adjust his grip on my hand, his thumb brushing once across my knuckles. A silent signal. Ready? He asked. I nodded. Once ready, he pushed the doors open, and cool night air rushed in again, sharper this time, more immediate. The outside space was not the terrace we had been on before. This was different, a side exit leading to a quieter section of the venue, a paved walkway lined with low lights and trimmed hedges. Beyond that, a parking area where a few cars sat waiting, engines off, silhouettes. Still, Adrian stepped through first, then guided me out after him, the doors closing softly behind us, cutting off the last of the ballroom noise. The silence out here felt heavier, deeper, like the night itself was listening. He did not stop moving. He led me down the path toward the parked cars, his pace steady, controlled, not rushed, but not slow either. How far do we go? I asked. Until we are out of their reach, he said simply, and something in his tone made it clear that reach was not just physical. I glanced ahead, the nearest car, a dark sedan, parked about 30 feet away, its surface reflecting the low lights along the path. Is that yours? I asked. Yes, he replied, then added, stay close until we are inside. I almost laughed at that, because close had already become instinct, because there was no version of this where I would suddenly decide to create distance. Now we moved the last stretch together, the sound of our steps quiet against the pavement, the night air cool against my skin, grounding in a way the ballroom never had. I could hear my own breathing now, steady, controlled, matching his pace, matching his presence. Then just as we reached the car, his hand tightened suddenly, not enough to hurt, but enough to stop me from taking the next step. Wait, he said sharply, but low. My body froze, instantly reacting before my mind could catch up. What is it? I whispered. Do not move, he replied, his gaze lifting past me, scanning the area behind us. And I felt it again, that shift, that presence, that certainty that we were not alone out here. Either the air seemed to hold itself still for a fraction of a second. Then he exhaled slowly, not relief, not exactly, just confirmation. They followed, he said quietly. My pulse spiked again, but I stayed exactly where I was, exactly how he needed me to be. What do we do now? I asked. He did not answer right away. Instead, his hand shifted from mine to my arm, guiding me just slightly closer to his side, his body angling again, placing himself between me and whatever was behind us. Then finally, he spoke, his voice calm, steady, absolute. Now, we do not run. His gaze dropped to mine, just for a second, just long enough for me to see it clearly, the decision, the certainty, the control. Stay with me, Ava, he said, because this is where they decide if you are really mine. Not running felt wrong. Every instinct in my body told me to get in the car, close the door, and disappear from whatever was behind us. But his hand on my arm held me there, steady, unyielding, and I understood this was not about escape. This was about proving something I did not fully understand. Yet I forced myself to breathe slow, controlled, like he had been teaching me, without saying it. My eyes stayed on him, not turning, not searching even. Though I could feel it now, the presence behind us, closer, heavier, like the night itself had shifted to make space for them. You said they need to believe it, I whispered, my voice barely there. His gaze stayed locked past me for one more second before it dropped to mine. Yes, he said simply, then show them. The words settled between us, and for a fraction of a second, everything else faded, the cars, the lights, the footsteps behind us, all of it narrowing down to one thing, the choice I was about to make. I could step back, I could break away, I could remind him and myself that this was temporary, that I had no place in his world, but I did not. Instead, I stepped closer, closing the small space between us, my hand sliding from his arm up to his shoulder, not hesitant, not unsure, just there like it belonged there. His expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough for me to see it, that flicker again, that recognition, like I had crossed another line, without asking permission. Good, he murmured, and his hand moved to my waist, pulling me just slightly closer, not possessive, not forced, just enough to make the picture clearer from a distance. I could feel his heartbeat steady even beneath the calm surface, and it grounded me more than anything else. I tilted my head, just slightly angling myself toward him, the way I had seen couples do all night, the way people who belonged together moved. Without thinking, you said, do not look afraid, I whispered. He almost smiled. Then do not be, he replied, and something in his tone made it feel less like an order and more like a promise. The footsteps behind us stopped. I felt it without hearing it, that sudden stillness, that shift in the air that meant they were close enough, now close enough to see, to judge, to decide. Adrian did not turn immediately. Instead, his hand tightened just slightly at my waist, his body angling again, shielding, without hiding. Then finally, he spoke, his voice calm, even as if we were still inside, surrounded by music and laughter. You should have stayed inside. The reply came a moment later, smooth, controlled, the same voice. From the terrace, I recognized it instantly. And this time, I did not have to fight the urge to turn. I simply did not. You brought her out here, the man continued. And there was something different in his tone, now, not just curiosity, something sharper, something that pressed at the edges of the illusion. Adrian did not react outwardly, his posture unchanged, his hand steady against me. She needed air, he said simply, his thumb brushing once against my side, a small movement, but deliberate, like he was reinforcing the moment. The man took a step closer. I could feel it in the way the air shifted around us, in the subtle change in distance. I kept my focus on Adrian, like he was the only thing that mattered. Like the rest of the world did not exist. It is rare for you to bring someone who matters to a place like this, the man said, and I felt the weight of that sentence settle. Adrian's grip on me did not change, but something in him did not. Tension, not hesitation, something quieter, something more controlled. She matters, he said, and the words landed differently than anything else he had said so far, not sharp, not defensive, just certain. And for a second, I forgot this was an act, I forgot this was a role. Because the way he said it did not sound like pretending. The silence stretched just long enough to feel intentional. Then the man spoke again, softer now, almost thoughtful. Then perhaps I should introduce myself properly. I felt the shift as Adrian turned slightly, guiding me with him just enough that I was now facing the man. Without breaking the closeness between us, I lifted my gaze, calmly meeting his eyes for the first time. He was older than Adrian, maybe by 10 years, his suit just as precise, his posture just as controlled, but his eyes were different, colder, more measured, like he saw people as pieces rather than individuals. I inclined my head slightly, polite, composed. Ava, I said simply, not offering more, not giving him anything extra. His gaze lingered on me longer than was comfortable. But I did not look away. I did not flinch. I held it the way Adrian had shown me how to exist in moments like this. A small smile touched the man's lips, not warm, not unkind, just acknowledging. Interesting, he said softly. Then his attention shifted back to Adrian. You always did have a talent for choosing unexpected variables. Adrian's expression did not change. People are often underestimated, he replied. And there was something in his tone now, something that felt almost deliberate, like he was making a point. The man studied him for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. Perhaps, he said then, after a brief pause, enjoy your evening, both of you. His gaze flicked back to me one last time, then he stepped back, the space between us widening, the tension easing but not disappearing as his footsteps retreated into the night. Adrian did not move right away. He waited again, like before confirming something unseen, then slowly his hand loosened just slightly at my waist, not releasing, just easing. His gaze dropped to mine. And for the first time since we stepped outside, I saw it clearly, not calculation, not control, something else, something quieter. You did not break, he said softly, I let out a breath. I did not realize I was holding. Neither did you, I replied, his lips curved just slightly at that. Then he nodded once. No, I did not. The moment stretched just long enough to feel real before the world rushed back, and the cars, the lights, the night air, everything settling into place around us. Then his hand shifted again, guiding me toward the car this time. Without hesitation, we are leaving now, he said, and the certainty in his voice made it clear this part was no longer a question. I nodded, stepping with him. As he opened the passenger door for me, his movements still controlled, still precise, but different now, less guarded, less sharp. I slid into the seat, the leather cool beneath me, and for a second I just sat there, hands resting in my lap, trying to catch up to everything that had just happened. Adrian closed the door gently, then moved around the front of the car and got in beside me. The engine started with a low, quiet hum, the headlights cutting through the darkness ahead. He did not pull away immediately. Instead, his hands rested on the steering wheel, his gaze fixed forward, like he was thinking, like he was deciding something that still had not been said. Then finally, he spoke, his voice lower than before, quieter. You made them believe. I turned to look at him, my pulse still not entirely steady. So, did you? I said. He shook his head once, not taking his eyes off the road ahead. No, Ava, he said softly, tonight, I did not have to pretend. The engine hummed softly beneath us, steady, controlled, like everything else about him. But his words stayed with me longer than the sound of the car. No, Ava, tonight, I did not have to pretend. I turned slightly in my seat, watching him more carefully now. The way his hands rested on the wheel, relaxed but ready. The way his eyes stayed forward, focused on the road ahead, like he was already 3 steps beyond this moment. You say things like that too easily, I said quietly, and there was something in my voice I did not try to hide this time. Not fear, not hesitation, something closer to challenge. His jaw shifted, just slightly, not tension, not annoyance, just acknowledgement of the tone I had taken. Then do not listen to the words, he replied. Look at what I did instead. That made me pause, because it was not what I expected, because it forced me to think differently, to replay everything that had happened, not just what he said, but how he moved, how he positioned himself, how he chose when to speak and when to stay silent. You protected me, I said slowly, more statement than question. His grip on the wheel tightened, just slightly, barely noticeable. But there, then he exhaled once through his nose. I used you, he corrected, and the difference between those two things settled heavily in the space between us. I shook my head before I could stop myself. No, you did both, I said quietly. His gaze flicked toward me, then back to the road, like he had not expected that answer, like it disrupted something he had already decided in his mind. The city lights blurred past outside the window, street lights stretching into long lines against the dark glass. The world felt different out here, removed from the ballroom, from the tension, from the eyes watching us, but not entirely free of it, because I could still feel it, the echo of it, the awareness that whatever had started tonight had not ended with us getting into this car. Where are you taking me? I asked. After a moment, because that question had been waiting quietly beneath everything else, he did not answer right away. Instead, he adjusted the wheel slightly, guiding the car onto a quieter street, less traffic, fewer lights. Then finally, somewhere safe, he said simply. I let out a small breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Safe is relative, I replied, his lips curved just slightly at that, not amused exactly, but aware of the truth in it. Yes, it is, he said, then added softer, but safer than where you were. That should have reassured me. It should have settled something in my chest, but it did not, because the idea that I needed safer at all meant that tonight had crossed into something I had not agreed to, something I did not fully understand. Yet my fingers traced lightly over the fabric of my dress, an unconscious movement, grounding myself in something familiar. I did not ask for any of this, I said finally, not accusing, not defensive, just stating the truth. His response came without hesitation. I know. And there was no argument in it, no attempt to justify, just acknowledgement that made it harder to push back. Then why me? I asked again, because that question had not gone away. It had only grown heavier the longer I stayed in his world. He exhaled slowly, his gaze still forward. Because you stayed, he said, and the simplicity of that answer caught me off guard. I frowned slightly. That is not a reason. Yes, it is, he replied. And this time, there was something firmer in his tone, because most people would have walked away when it stopped making sense. You did not. I absorbed that, quietly replaying the moments in my head. The first time he held out his hand, the first warning, the dance, the hallway, the terrace, every point where I could have stepped back and did not. I should have, I said under my breath. His head tilted just slightly toward me, but he did not look over. No, you should not have, he said, and there was something in his voice now, something quieter, something that felt less like control and more like truth. The car slowed As we approached a red light, the glow casting a soft wash of color across the interior. For a moment, everything felt still contained, like the world outside had paused. Just long enough for us to exist in this space between decisions. I glanced out the window, then back at him. What happens now? I asked. The light changed to green, and the car moved forward again. His answer, coming a second later, now you go back to your life. The words landed heavier than I expected, like something inside me had anticipated a different answer, even though I knew better, even though I understood that this was never meant to extend beyond tonight. That is it? I asked, unable to keep the question from slipping out before I could stop it. His grip on the wheel shifted slightly, then steadied. That is what it should be, he said, and the choice of words did not go unnoticed. Should be, I repeated softly. He did not respond immediately, and that silence said more than anything else. The car turned again, this time into a quieter residential street lined with low buildings and dim porch lights, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten, because it looked like my world again, small, contained, predictable. You remember where you parked? He asked, and the question felt like a door opening back into everything I had stepped away from for a few hours. Yes, I said quietly. Good, he replied. I will take you there. We drove the rest of the way in silence, not uncomfortable, not empty, just full of things neither of us was saying. When he finally pulled into the parking lot near the venue, my car sat exactly where I had left it, small, ordinary, untouched by everything that had happened tonight. He put the car in park, but did not turn off the engine right away. His hands rested on the wheel again, his gaze forward like before, like he was deciding something one last time. I waited, not speaking, not moving, because something in the air felt unfinished, like there was one more line that had not been said yet. Then finally, he turned to me fully, his eyes meeting mine, steady, clear. No distraction, no distance. You go home, he said quietly, and this time it did not sound like a suggestion. It sounded like something he needed me to do. I nodded slowly, my hand moving toward the door handle, but stopping just short of it, because leaving suddenly felt harder than it should have, because stepping back into my life felt different now, like something had shifted that I could not name. You are not going to tell me your last name, I said softly, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to see how he would answer. His lips curved slightly, something almost like amusement touching his expression. If I do, he said, you will not forget me. I held his gaze steady. I do not think that is the problem. His expression changed then, just a fraction, something deeper, something quieter passing through his eyes, like he understood exactly what I meant, like he knew that forgetting had already stopped being an option. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card, plain, simple, no design, no embellishment, just a number written neatly across the front. He held it out to me, not forcing, not insisting, just offering. If anything changes, he said, if anyone asks questions, if anything feels different, you call me. I looked at the card for a second before taking it, my fingers brushing his briefly, the contact quick, but grounding again. Like everything else about him, I will not need it, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. His gaze held mine for a second longer, maybe two. Then he nodded once. I hope you do not, he replied. I opened the door, then stepping out into the night, the cool air hitting my skin, grounding me back in something familiar, something real. I closed the door gently behind me and stood there for a moment, watching him through the window, the engine still running, the headlights casting long shadows across the pavement. He did not drive away immediately. Instead, he stayed there, just long enough for me to feel it, that same awareness, that same connection that had followed us through every moment of the night. Then finally, he shifted the car into motion, pulling away smoothly, disappearing into the quiet street ahead. And as I stood there alone again in the same place where my night had started, I realized something that unsettled me more than anything else. He was gone, but the feeling he left behind was not. And for the first time since I sat alone at that table, I was not sure which one mattered more. The silence after he left did not feel like quiet. It felt like something unfinished, like a sentence that had stopped in the middle and refused to end. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, my hand still holding the card. He gave me, my fingers tracing the edge without thinking, as if it might explain something if I focused on it long enough. The parking lot looked exactly the same as it had before, the same dim lights, the same scattered cars, the same distant hum of the city, but it did not feel the same, not anymore. I walked to my car slowly, each step grounding me back into something familiar, something normal, the sound of my heels against the pavement. Sharper now, without the music to soften it. I unlocked the door and slid inside, the seat cool beneath me, the faint scent of my own car wrapping around me like a reminder of who I was before tonight. I placed the card on the passenger seat and stared at it for a second longer than necessary. Just a number, no name, no explanation, just a line that connected me to something I did not fully understand. I shook my head slightly, as if that might clear the feeling away, then started the engine. The drive home was short, maybe 10 minutes, but it felt longer, not because of the distance, but because my mind would not settle. Every streetlight, every turn, every familiar building felt slightly out of place, like I was seeing everything through a different lens. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, the sight of it hit me in a way it never had before. Small brick buildings, 2 stories, no security gate, no valet, no soft lighting, just a place where people lived because they had to. I parked in my usual spot, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, the quiet settling around me again, heavier, now more real. I reached for the card again, my fingers brushing over the number, and for a brief second I considered it, calling it, asking questions, demanding answers about what tonight had been, about what he had meant, about what I had stepped into without realizing it. But I did not. Instead, I slipped it into my purse, closed it, and stepped out of the car. The hallway inside my building smelled faintly like detergent and something cooking down the hall. The lights flickered slightly as I walked past them. Nothing about this place had changed, and yet everything felt different, like I had crossed into another world for a few hours and now I was back, but not entirely the same. I unlocked my apartment door, quietly stepping inside. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the familiar sounds wrapped around me, grounding me more than anything else had all night. My shoes came off first, then my bag placed gently on the small table near the door. I moved through the space, slowly, almost carefully, like I needed to reintroduce myself to it. I paused at the doorway to my daughter's room, the soft glow of her nightlight spilling into the hallway. She was asleep, exactly like the message had said, small, curled under her blanket, one hand resting near her face, her breathing steady. Even I stepped closer, lowering myself onto the edge of the bed for a moment, just watching her, letting that simple, quiet moment settle everything else. She stirred slightly, then relaxed again, and something in my chest eased just a little. "You are safe," I whispered softly, not sure if I was saying it to her or to myself. I stood after a minute, pulling the blanket up slightly before stepping back out into the hallway, closing the door gently behind me. The apartment felt quieter now, still, but not empty. I leaned against the wall for a second, letting out a breath I did not realize I had been holding since I left the parking lot. Then my gaze shifted to my purse sitting on the table, the card inside it, suddenly heavier than it should have been, like it carried more than just a number, like it carried a choice. I walked over, slowly opening the purse and pulling the card back out. The numbers stared up at me, simple, unassuming, but impossible to ignore. "If anything changes, if anything feels different, you call me." His voice echoed in my head, steady, certain, like he had already anticipated this moment. I frowned slightly, because something did feel different, not outside, not in any obvious way, but inside, like something had shifted into place that I could not move back. Then my phone buzzed in my hand, and my heart jumped before I could stop it. The screen lit up with a message, not from a number I recognized, not from anyone saved in my contacts, just a simple line that made everything in me go still. "Did you make it home safely?" I stared at the message for a second, my mind catching up to what it meant, to how he would have gotten my number, to the fact that, of course, he would have known without needing to ask. My fingers hovered over the screen, unsure for a moment before I typed back, "Yes." The reply came almost instantly. "Good." Then a second message followed, "Get some rest, tomorrow will feel different." I read it twice, then a third time, my chest tightening slightly because of the way he said it, not like a suggestion, not like a guess, but like a certainty. I typed a response before I could stop myself. "What happens tomorrow?" The dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again, like he was choosing his words carefully. Finally the message came through, "Tomorrow you decide if tonight was a mistake." I stared at the screen longer than I should have, my thoughts catching on that word, mistake. Because that was what this should have been, a strange moment, an unusual night, something I walked away from and never looked back on. But it did not feel like that. It felt like something else, something unfinished, something that had only just started. My fingers tightened slightly around the phone, then slowly I locked the screen, setting it down on the table beside me. The apartment was quiet again, the same as before, but I was not. I moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out at the empty parking lot below. My car sat exactly where I had left it, nothing unusual, nothing out of place. And yet I could not shake the feeling that something had followed me home, not something I could see, not something I could name, just a shift, a change, a presence in the way I thought, in the way I felt, in the way everything now seemed to carry a little more weight. I let the curtain fall back into place, then turned away from the window, my gaze drifting once more to the purse, to the card, to The choice sitting quietly inside it, tomorrow you decide, I repeated softly to myself. And for the first time since I stepped into that ballroom, I realized the most unsettling part of all of this was not him. It was the fact that a part of me already knew I might not want to walk away. Morning did not feel like morning. It felt like a continuation, like the night had stretched itself into something quieter, but no less present. I woke up before my alarm, the soft light coming through the window casting long shadows across the ceiling. For a moment, I just lay there staring at it, trying to remember what normal felt like before last night, before him. Before the way everything had shifted without asking permission. My phone sat on the nightstand where I left it, the screen dark, silent, but I could still feel it, like it was waiting, like it already knew I would reach for it eventually. I turned my head slightly, listening. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft sound of my daughter moving in her room. Nothing out of place, nothing unusual, and yet I did not feel settled. I pushed myself up, slowly running a hand through my hair, and sat there for a second longer than necessary, letting the stillness settle around me. You decide if tonight was a mistake. His words returned immediately, like they had never left. I exhaled slowly, because the answer should have been easy. It should have been obvious. Yes, it was a mistake, a strange, unexpected moment that had no place in my life, no reason to exist beyond a story I would never tell. But it did not feel like that. It felt unfinished. I stood and moved through my routine, automatically brushing my teeth, making coffee, checking on my daughter, helping her get ready for the day. Everything the same, everything familiar, but there was a difference in me, a quiet awareness that followed every movement, every thought, like I was watching myself from a slight distance. My daughter looked up at me over her cereal spoon, pausing mid-bite. "You look weird," she said simply, and I almost laughed at that, because of course she would notice. Kids always did. They saw things adults tried to ignore. I lifted an eyebrow at her. Weird how she shrugged, like it was obvious, like I should already know. "Like you were thinking too loud." I let out a small breath that sounded closer to a real laugh this time. "Maybe," I said. She studied me for another second, then went back to her cereal, satisfied with the answer in a way only children could be. I walked her to the door, kissed the top of her head, and watched as she stepped out into the hallway, heading toward the neighbor who would take her to school. Like always, like nothing had changed. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, letting the quiet settle again. Then my gaze shifted to the table where my purse sat, exactly where I left it last night, the card still inside, the number still waiting. I walked over slowly, my fingers brushing the edge of the purse before I opened it, and pulled the card out again. The numbers looked the same as they had hours ago, simple, unassuming, but heavier now, like they carried more meaning. Because now it was not just about what had happened, it was about what I was going to do with it. I picked up my phone without thinking, unlocking the screen, my thumb hovering just above the messages. His last text still there. "Tomorrow you decide if tonight was a mistake." I stared at it for a second longer than necessary, then opened a new message, my fingers hesitating for just a moment before I typed, "What changes today?" I almost deleted it, almost convinced myself that reaching out at all was the wrong choice. But I did not. Instead, I hit send and waited. The response came faster than I expected, like he had been expecting it, like he had been waiting for this exact moment. "Everything," he replied simply. I stared at the screen, a small frown forming, because that was not an answer, because it was too broad, too vague, too certain. "Everything," I typed back. Before I could stop myself, "You are not making this easy." The dots appeared, then paused, then appeared again, like he was considering something more carefully this time. "It was not supposed to be easy," he responded. I let out a breath, setting the phone down on the table, as if that might create distance between me and the decision forming in my chest. I turned away, pacing slowly across the small space of my apartment, the floor creaking slightly beneath my steps, grounding me in something real, something tangible. "You go back to your life," he had said last night, like it was that simple, like stepping away from something like this would not leave a mark. But it had. I could feel it in the way I moved, in the way I thought, in the way the idea of ignoring this felt heavier than answering it. My phone buzzed again, and my heart reacted before my mind could catch up. "Another message. Where are you?" I stared at the words for a second longer than necessary, because that question felt different, not casual, not curious, direct. My fingers hovered over the screen, then slowly, I typed it home. The reply came almost instantly. "Good, stay there. I will come to you." My breath caught slightly, and I froze for a second, not expecting that, not prepared for the shift from distance to presence. "You do not even know where I live," I typed back, and there was something in that statement that felt both obvious and pointless. At the same time, his answer came without delay. "Yes, I do." I stared at the screen again, my chest tightening, not in fear, not exactly, but an awareness, the same awareness I had felt all night, that he operated in a world where things were known without being explained, where answers existed before questions were asked. My grip on the phone tightened slightly, then loosened, as I exhaled slowly. "You should not come here," I typed finally, not because I was sure of it, but because it felt like the right thing to say, like a line I should draw even if I was not sure I could keep it. His response came a few seconds later. "I am already on my way." I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting that settle, because of course he was, because this was not something that would stay contained within last night, because whatever this was had already moved forward, whether I was ready for it or not. I opened my eyes again, looking around my apartment, the small space, the simple furniture, the life I had built carefully, quietly. Piece by piece, it looked the same as it always had. But now it felt like something was about to step into it, something that did not belong here, something that would change the way everything fit together. My phone buzzed one more time, and I did not have to look to know it was him. I still did, though, just to confirm. "I will be there in 10 minutes. I stared at the message, then at the door, then back at the message again, my pulse steady, but heavier than before, like each second was building towards something I could not stop. I set the phone down slowly, my fingers lingering against it for just a moment before I pulled back and moved toward the door, my hand resting lightly on the handle, not opening it, just there waiting, because for the first time since last night the choice was no longer just in my head. It was about to stand on the other side of that door, and I was not sure if I was ready to let it in. I kept my hand on the door longer than I should have, not opening it, not stepping away, just standing there, like the moment itself was waiting for me to decide what kind of person I was going to be. When it finally arrived, the hallway outside was quiet. I could hear faint movement from another apartment, a television somewhere down the hall, a door closing. Nothing unusual, nothing that warned me that something different was about to step into my life. My phone sat on the table behind me, silent now, like it had already said everything it needed to say. 10 minutes, he had said, and somehow I knew he would not be early, and he would not be late. He would arrive exactly when he meant to, because that was how he moved through the world, precise, controlled, intentional. I exhaled slowly, letting my shoulders drop just slightly, trying to ease the tension I had been holding since the message came. "You can still say no," I whispered to myself, not because I believed it fully, but because I needed to hear it out loud, needed to remind myself that this was still a choice, that I still had control over what happened next. The knock came exactly on time, not loud, not aggressive, just 2 firm taps against the door. Enough to be heard, enough to be certain. My breath caught for half a second, then steadied. My hand tightened slightly on the handle, then finally I turned it. The door opened slowly, the hallway light spilling into the apartment, and there he was, exactly as expected, and somehow still different from the way I remembered him. He was not wearing the same suit from last night. This one was simpler, darker, less formal, but still perfectly fitted, like everything about him was chosen with purpose. His posture was the same, straight, controlled, his presence just as steady, just as impossible to ignore. But here in this hallway in front of my door, he felt out of place, not because he did not belong anywhere, but because he did not belong here, not in this building, not in this life. His eyes met mine immediately, not scanning, not assessing, just holding steady, like he had already seen everything he needed to see. "You opened the door," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice, not surprise, not relief, just acknowledgement. I stepped back slightly, giving him space to enter, without saying anything at first, because words felt unnecessary in this moment, because the fact that he was here already said enough. He stepped inside without hesitation, his movement smooth, controlled, like he had done this before, like stepping into unfamiliar spaces did not slow him down. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and suddenly the apartment felt smaller, like his presence filled more space than it should. I turned to face him fully, my arms crossing lightly in front of me, not defensive, just grounding. "You said everything changes today," I said, keeping my voice even. He nodded once, his gaze moving briefly around the room, taking in the details, the small couch, the table, the kitchen, just beyond, then returning to me. "It does," he said simply. I tilted my head slightly, waiting, because I knew by now he would not waste words, because if he was here it was for a reason, and he would get to it when he decided the timing was right. "You were seen with me last night," he continued, his tone steady, not rushed, not hesitant. "That does not go unnoticed." I let out a small breath. I figured that much. He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded, like he expected that response, like he had already accounted for it. "They will ask questions," he said, "not if." When I absorbed that quietly, my mind moving ahead of the words, forming the implications, the way something simple, like a dance, could turn into something that followed me beyond a single night, What kind of questions? I asked questions about you, about who you are, how long you have been with me, why you were. There his answers came evenly like he had already had this conversation in his head before stepping through my door. I shifted my weight, slightly, my arms dropping back to my sides, because this was no longer abstract, this was real, this was something that had moved from possibility into consequence. And what do I say? I asked. He stepped a little closer, not invading, not forcing, just closing the distance enough that the conversation felt more contained. You say what we showed them. He replied simply, you do not change the story. I frowned slightly. That was not a story. It was a moment. He shook his head once. No, Ava, it was a message. And that word landed differently, heavier, more intentional. I let the silence sit for a second, then asked, and what exactly was the message? His gaze held mine steady. You matter to me, he said, and there it was again, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just certain, like it was a fact that had already been established. I felt something shift in my chest, not confusion, not disbelief, something else, something that made it harder to respond with the clarity I expected. This is still part of the act, I said quietly, more to remind myself than to question him. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes did not soften, not harden. Just deepen slightly. That depends, he said, on what you decide. Next, the room felt quieter after that, not empty, just focused, like everything had narrowed down to this moment, this choice, this line I had been approaching since last night. I looked at him fully, now really looked at him, not just the surface, not just the controlled presence, but the space behind it, the part of him that did not speak unless it needed to. You said I go back to my life, I reminded him. I did, he agreed. Then why are you here? The question came out steadier than I expected, because I needed to know, because this was the point where things either ended or changed completely. He held my gaze for a second longer than necessary, then answered, because they will not stop at the questions. And the weight of that sentence settled into the room, like something final, like something that removed the illusion of choice I had been holding on to. I exhaled, slowly, my thoughts catching up to what he was saying, to what he was not saying. And what happens if I say I want out? I asked, not because I was sure that was what I wanted, but because I needed to hear the answer. He did not hesitate. Then I make sure you are safe, he said, and there was no doubt in it, no condition, no hesitation, just certainty. That should have been enough. It should have been the end of the conversation, the clear path back to everything I knew, everything I understood, but it was not, because something in me resisted it, not the safety, not the distance, but the idea of stepping away completely, of pretending none of this had mattered. And if I do not want out? I asked quietly. His expression shifted just slightly, not surprise, not relief, something closer to readiness, like he had been waiting for that question from the moment he knocked on my door. Then you stay, he said simply, and the words did not feel like a trap. They did not feel like pressure. They felt like a door opening. I let the silence stretch between us for a moment longer, my thoughts moving through everything that had happened, the dance, the hallway, the terrace, the car, the messages, the way he had looked at me, the way he had spoken, the way I had responded without fully understanding why. Then finally, I nodded once, not rushed, not hesitant, just certain enough. I am still here, I said. His gaze held mine, and for the first time since he stepped inside, something in his posture eased, not visibly, not dramatically, just enough to feel it. Then he nodded once in return. Yes, he said quietly, you are the space between us. Did not feel the same after that. It was no longer uncertain, no longer balanced on the edge of a decision. It had shifted into something quieter but stronger, like a line had been crossed without either of us needing to acknowledge exactly when it happened. He did not move closer, and I did not step back. We just stood there for a moment, the silence settling into something that did not need to be filled. You understand what this means, he said finally, his voice lower now, less controlled, not in a careless way, but in a way that felt more direct, more real. I nodded slowly, even though I knew I did not fully understand, not yet, not completely, but enough to know this was no longer just about one night, enough to know this would follow me into everything else. What changes for me? I asked, because that was the part that mattered, not the abstract, not the idea, but the reality. He did not answer immediately, his gaze shifting briefly around the apartment again, then returning to me, as if measuring how much to say, how much I needed to know right now. You are no longer invisible, he said simply, and something in that statement settled deeper than I expected. I let out a small breath that was almost a laugh. Invisible was never the word I would have chosen for myself, but I understood what he meant, the difference between being seen and being noticed, between existing and being observed. And now I was part of something that people would pay attention to whether I wanted them to or not. I crossed my arms lightly, not defensive, just grounding, And what does that actually look like? I asked. His expression remained steady, but there was something else there now, something more deliberate, like he was choosing his words carefully. People will look at you differently, he said. They will speak to you differently. They will assume things about you that you did not choose. I absorbed that quietly, because I had seen it before in smaller ways in different rooms, the way people adjusted their tone, their posture, their expectations based on who they thought you were and who they believed you were connected to. And now that connection had a name, even if I had not said it out loud yet. And if I make a mistake, I asked. His response came without hesitation. Then I fix it. The certainty in his voice should have been reassuring. It should have settled something, but instead it made me more aware of the space I was stepping into, not because I doubted him, but because I understood what it meant to rely on someone like that, to exist in a world where mistakes were not just personal, they were shared. I moved slightly toward the small table, picking up the card he had given me the night before, holding it between my fingers like it was something more than paper. You already assumed I would not walk away, I said quietly. His gaze followed the movement to the card, then back to me. No, he said. I prepared for both outcomes. That answer felt more honest than anything else he could have said. I nodded once, accepting it, because it meant this was not about control, it was about readiness, and that difference mattered more than I expected. My fingers tightened slightly around the card, then loosened as I set it back down on the table. I have a life here, I said, and the words felt heavier now than they had that morning. A child, responsibilities, routines, things that did not bend easily around something new, something unpredictable. His gaze softened just slightly, not in a way that weakened him, but in a way that acknowledged the weight of what I had just said. I know, he replied, and there was no dismissal in it, no attempt to minimize it. You do not leave that behind, you adjust around it. I studied him for a moment longer, because that answer felt too simple, too clean for something that would inevitably be complicated. And what if those two things do not fit together? I asked. His expression did not change. Then we make them fit, he said, and there it was. Again, that certainty, that refusal to accept incompatibility as a final answer. I exhaled slowly, because part of me wanted to challenge that, wanted to point out all the ways life did not bend so easily. But another part of me recognized the pattern, the way he approached everything, not by asking if it could work, but by deciding that it would. I walked toward the window again, pulling the curtain aside just enough to let the light in the parking lot look the same as it always had, but now I saw it differently. The angles, the distance, the exposure, like I was already starting to think in terms I had not needed before. You said they will not stop at questions, I said quietly, still looking out. What does that mean for me? It means they will test what they saw, he replied from behind me, not moving closer, not crowding the space, just answering. And what did they see? I asked. I turned slightly, then enough to catch his reflection in the glass. His posture still composed, his presence still steady, but his eyes more focused than before. They saw you stay, he said. They saw you choose not to leave, and that matters more than anything you could have said. I let that settle, because it was true, because every moment of last night had built toward that choice, even if I had not fully understood it at the time. I turned back, fully now facing him again. And what if I changed my mind now? I asked, not because I planned to, but because I needed to know if that was still allowed. His gaze held mine without hesitation. Then you tell me, he said, and there was no tension in it, no resistance, just a clear line drawn that made it easier to breathe. I nodded once, because that answer mattered more than I expected, because it meant this was not a trap, this was a decision I could still step away from, even if it was getting harder to imagine doing. So the silence stretched again, not uncomfortable, just full, like there were still things neither of us had said yet. Then he moved slightly, this time stepping closer, but not too close, just enough that the space between us felt intentional rather than distant. There is something else, he said, and the shift in his tone made my attention sharpen. Immediately what I asked, because whatever this was, it felt different from everything else he had said so far. His gaze did not waver, not for a second. If you stay, he continued, this does not remain separate from your life, it becomes part of it. The words landed heavier than anything else he had said, not because they were surprising, but because they were final, because they removed the illusion that this could exist in isolation, that I could step into his world without it touching mine. I held his gaze steady, because that was the moment that mattered, not the dance, not the questions, not the people watching, but this, the reality of what staying actually meant. I took a slow breath, letting it out just as carefully, then answered, I am not looking for something separate. His expression shifted just slightly, not surprise, not relief, something quieter, something that felt like understanding. Then he nodded once, and for the first time since he stepped into my apartment, the tension in The room changed, not gone, but different, like it had found its place, like it was no longer something to resist, but something to move within. We move forward, he said simply, and the words did not feel like a question, they felt like a beginning. Moving forward did not feel like a step, it felt like a shift, like something inside me had aligned in a way I could not undo, even if I wanted to. The room seemed smaller now, not because it had changed, but because the distance between what I was and what I was stepping into had closed. Adrian did not rush the moment. He did not fill the silence with unnecessary words. He simply stood there watching me, like he was confirming something. Not in me, but in the space between us. Then his gaze moved slightly toward the door and back again. We do this carefully, he said, not as a warning, but as a fact. I nodded because I understood that part, even if I did not understand everything else. Careful was not hesitation, it was intention. It was knowing where to stand, where to speak, where to remain still. What does forward look like? I asked, because I needed something solid, something I could hold onto. He stepped closer this time, not just enough to shift the air, but enough that I could feel the presence of him more clearly, the control, the steadiness, the way he carried decisions before they were spoken. It looks like you do not change who you are, he said. It looks like you do not let them decide that for you. I held his gaze, because that answer mattered more than anything else he had said so far, because it meant I was not being replaced, I was being seen. Then what do you change? I asked. His lips curved slightly, not a smile, but something close. Your awareness, he said, your position, the way you move, when people are watching, the way you speak, when they listen. I exhaled slowly because that made sense, because I had already felt it last night, the difference between existing and being observed, the way every small movement could mean something more when the wrong person was paying attention. I walked back toward the table, picking up the card again, turning it between my fingers. Then I slipped this into my life, like it belongs there, I said quietly. He shook his head once. Not quite. You do not slip it in, he replied. You acknowledge that it is already there. I paused at that because it was true, because from the moment he took my hand, nothing had been separate, nothing had stayed contained to one place or one moment. I set the card down again, more deliberately this time, then looked back at him. And what about you? I asked, because that part had not been clear, because everything so far had been about me, about what I would face, what I would carry. His expression shifted just slightly, not guarded, not distant, just more direct, like he had been waiting for that question. I do not step in and out of this, he said quietly. I am in it with you now. The words did not feel like a promise, they felt like a statement of fact, something that had already been decided and would not be undone. I studied him for a second longer, because that was the difference between us. He had already chosen, I was still catching up. Then a sound broke through the moment, the faint echo of footsteps in the hallway outside, followed by a voice. Someone passing by, something ordinary, something that reminded me the world had not paused for this. I glanced toward the door instinctively, then back to him. My daughter will be home in a few hours, I said. And that felt like the most real thing in the room, the thing that did not shift or bend around anything else. His gaze softened just slightly again, not weaker, just more aware. I know, he said. Then we work around that, simple words, but they carried weight, because they acknowledged that this was not just about us, it was about everything connected to me, everything that mattered. Before he ever stepped into my life, I moved toward the window again, pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out. The same parking lot, the same quiet space, the same ordinary view, but it no longer felt untouched. It felt like something had been added to it, something unseen, but present. I let the curtain fall and turned back to him. What happens when they come here? I asked, because that question had been sitting in the back of my mind since the moment he said they would not stop. His answer came without hesitation. Then they leave. Without what they came for. The certainty in his voice did not feel like arrogance. It felt like control, like he had already mapped out every possibility and decided the outcome before it happened. I nodded slowly, accepting that, not because I fully understood it, but because I understood him enough to know he would not say it if he could not make it real. The silence returned again, but it was different now, not uncertain, not waiting, just settled, like something had been placed where it belonged. Then he moved closer, one final step, closing the space completely, not overwhelming, not forceful, just present, like he had chosen exactly where to stand and would not move from it. This is not something you ease into, he said quietly. This is something you decide and stand in. I held his gaze steady, because I knew that already, because everything about last night had built toward this moment, this clarity, this line that did not blur or bend. I am not standing here by accident, I replied. His eyes searched mine for a second longer, like he was looking for hesitation, like he was confirming there was none. Then he nodded once, slow, deliberate, and something in the air shifted again, not tension, not uncertainty, something steadier, something that felt like alignment. "Then we do not step back," he said simply, and the words did not feel like pressure, they felt like agreement. I let out a breath I had been holding since before he knocked on my door, and this time it did not come back tight, it came back steady. "Then we do not," I echoed, quietly, and for the first time since everything started. The room felt balanced, not safe, not predictable, but clear, like the lines had been drawn, and neither of us was pretending they were not there. A moment passed, then another, and the ordinary world outside continued. The same hallway, sounds the same, distant voices, the same life I had built still standing exactly where it had been before, but now it existed alongside something else, something that did not replace it, but changed how it fit. Together Adrian stepped back, slightly, not leaving, not creating distance, just shifting the space enough to let the moment settle. His gaze moved toward the door, then back to me. "I will not always be the one who arrives first," he said, and the meaning behind that landed immediately. Like a quiet challenge, like a reminder that this would not always be controlled by him. I nodded, once understanding what he was asking without him saying it out loud. "Next time I step forward," I said. His lips curved slightly, that almost smile again, and for a second the intensity of everything eased just enough to breathe. Then he turned toward the door, his movements as controlled as always, but different now, less like he was entering something unknown, and more like he was leaving something established. He opened the door, then paused just long enough to look back at me one more time. "This changes everything," he said, not as a warning, not as a question, just as truth. I met his gaze steady, then let it. "I know," I replied, and this time there was no hesitation in it. He nodded once, then stepped out into the hallway, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me standing in the same space, the same room, the same life, but not the same person. And as the quiet settled around me again, I realized something that felt both unsettling and certain. The world had not changed, but I had, and that was enough to make everything else follow.